If you're following on the study guide, got one there if you want to look. We are on page 36. So we have looked at the place of Christian love in our witness. We have looked at the place of listening. That was last week in our witness, in our life of witness. Building relationships with people, maintaining relationships with people so that we can bring them the gospel and continue to bring them the gospel. These things are important. Today, it's another L word you see there, point number 3, like in quotation marks. So what's that about? Like people, in other words, people who are similar to each other, right? They're alike. Form easy relationships. Oh, you know this, right? So when people try to find a mate, when they try to find a spouse, they want to have certain things in common for some compatibility. Now you can't be clones of each other necessarily either. That's not always a good situation either. If you're too much alike each other,
boring.
Well, boring, or part of the idea is that by finding a spouse, you're finding someone to fill in on some of your. It's like if you had a football team of 11 quarterbacks, who's going to block? Yeah, you need some of the hefty guys up front for different tasks and things. And so when you're looking for a spouse, you're looking for someone who is not your clone, but you need to have some shared interest at some degree. And then the fact that they aren't the same as you exactly means that you can stretch and grow and try new things. That's all good as well. This is also something you can apply to relationships in a more general way. That it's friendships are going to often revolve around a common interest or interests. But then there will be some different things that mean that in this relationship, in this friendship, you each bring something more to the table. But we have to have some of those commonalities, and so that also plays a role as we look at who are we going. So let's say you've got a sports interest. Let's say you've got a hobby interest. If I can pick on someone here, I know Lila just joined a group in the last year since County Fair that does some sewing projects. Maybe some of you saw or even received some of her work at Christmas time. Well, those ladies maybe aren't exactly the same as each other in every way, but that's a common interest that got them together. When I came in today, Bob was asking me which team I'm going to pull for in the Super Bowl. And I'm a football fan. I played the sport, make a brief mention of that in the sermon today. But there are some people who have no interest whatsoever. I listen to a commentator on the television or on the radio sometimes who professes to know nothing. A friend of mine who's a pastor on Facebook had posted a meme that said, if you're going to a Super Bowl party today and you really don't know anything about the sport or about the teams, here are safe phrases you can use to make it sound like you know something, and here's a place in the game where you can use them. So, the offense comes out on the field and they really need to establish the running game, right? Which may have nothing to do with what's going on at the moment, but it sounds like you are interested and know something about the sport. And on and on he goes with various things. If you see a yellow flag thrown, you can say something like, well, just let them play. And you may not know anything about the situation, but it sounds like you maybe know something about the sport, and so you won't embarrass yourself at the, here's your safe phrases, and if you're watching, look for this kind of thing, this is where you use it. So you might be going to a Super Bowl party today, and your main interest might be the commercials, which has historically been a thing for a lot of people because the various companies who buy advertising time try to make those commercials particularly eye-catching. They're going to put all that money into it and entertaining, and a lot of people enjoy that also. But whatever the case, not everybody's a football fan, and so not everybody's going to be interested in that. There are some people, if you invited them to go to a OU game at the stadium or
That'd be very useful. It's just like a little short book.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
these are the coaches
one page cheat sheet in this case.
Right.
Get you through.
You need the cheat sheet.
I need a cheat sheet to read the cheat sheet.
Like I said, if you see a yellow flag fly across the screen, then you say, "Let him play," and you're safe. You're good. People will think you know what you're talking about. All right. And I won't explain to you why that's the case. You don't need to know why that's the case. All right. So, but similar interests. So they talk about some of them here: common likes or interests. So professional, recreational, familial. I'll talk about grandkids with anybody. Forms a natural basis for relationship. 1 Corinthians 9. So get up here to the next passage. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Now, Paul is recognizing here that he wasn't actually like all these people in every way. So this would be the other side of it. So people with similar interests, similar abilities, may naturally be drawn to each other. But you can massage this whole feature of human relationships a little bit by being open and interested. So if opera is not your thing, somebody bellowing out some aria, the same vowel for 3 pages of music before they finish the word, maybe that's not your thing. But maybe it's someone that you should get to know's thing. And do you suppose that you could force yourself to sit and watch one? And learn from that other person. What do they think are the finer? Why does this interest them so much? Part of it is having interest in other people. At my age, you all came to my house to celebrate my 60th birthday a couple weeks ago. I am not even a little bit interested in playing with Barbie dolls.
Good.
But I have 2 little granddaughters who are. So, and they quite frankly aren't all that interested in talking about theology. But maybe I can sit on the floor with them and play with their dolls, or play whatever imaginary game my older granddaughter makes up with her collection of toys and stuff, and she's got quite an imagination.
I'm thinking you do too, and it may not go well for them.
You are right.
So far, nobody's been too bad, I don't think. But I want to have a relationship with them, right? And maybe if I show an interest in them now, they'll think Grandpa is cool. My wife has a T-shirt that says "Cool Grandma," and
Somebody gave it to me.
If you look, I don't know if you have it posted on your Facebook page. Probably not. You probably didn't repost it, but at the county fair last year, she bought these. I think there's some kind of Disney princess wands. So it's like, it looks like a wand, and then it has a princess on top, and then it's got lights, and if you in a dark room, it's like you got a disco ball on.
Yeah.
Well,
And it has
so if you
music.
do a little searching on Facebook, you might find a picture of my wife and my older granddaughter dancing around the living room with these things on in the dark. She's the cool grandma.
Sounds like chili.
The other grandma's cool enough as well, right? The other grandma has goats and chickens. How do you beat that? The point is, though, I've never caught my wife dancing around our house without the grandkids present, with one of those wands. Right? It's something you do because you care about these people. Right? You want to foster that relationship. Now, okay,
When we went to Las Vegas, I wanted to see Michael Jackson's presentation. He's not so much.
Was it called MJ1?
MJ1.
So, of course, Michael Jackson is not with us anymore, but they actually have a holographic representation. I mean, and it's fairly convincing from where you're sitting in the audience. And it's Cirque du Soleil, this acrobatic team that's doing stuff to his music and all. And so, I don't.
You would have not.
I don't love Michael Jackson, but someone said I don't wish him any specific harm.
But Robin wanted to go.
But Robin wanted to go, and okay. I mean, I don't find his music impossible to sit there and listen to. So we went to listen to it, right? And would I have bought those tickets just for me? No. So when you have common interests, that's a good place to build relationships. But as a Christian, you can do like Paul here. I mean, Paul is so which of these things is? I'm free and I belong to no man. So I'm not forced to do this. I'm not doing this because I'm obligated as such. But I make myself a slave to everyone so that I can win people, right? So to the Jews, I became like a Jew. Was Paul a Jew?
Yeah.
So, well, then how did he have to become like a Jew? Isn't he a Jew?
I wondered about that.
He's a Christian, so he has
Okay.
his commitment is different.
He is by way of race and nationality Jewish. Jewishness is this thing it covers multiple areas of your life, right? It is at kind of one at the same time ethnicity and faith. And even at this point in time, I don't know that the Christians really saw themselves. They still saw themselves as part of that same faith. It's not like Jesus established a different religion. He fulfilled the Old Testament religion. It is the true continuation of the Old Testament faith, right? If you're going to look at where the faith of the Bible, the faith of the God who made the universe, if you're going to look at where it branches at the time that Christ comes, which one of the branches is the correct one? Well, that's the Christian faith, because the other branch rejected their Messiah when he came. There is no way that can be the right one. But Paul it's in the next line. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. So even though I live in New Testament Christian freedom, I'm not under all those Jewish laws that were regarding your externals in life. So the more, this is, I don't know if you guys even see this or recognize this when it comes, but to have a fight on Facebook is an exercise in frustration. If you see something on Facebook or social media you don't like, you have to let it pass. But sometimes it's really hard. My fingers are just itching to get on that keyboard. But I know this never ends well. You can't have a good conversation this way. So, but I can't tell you how many times I see people misquote something about Scripture. And a lot of times what they're doing is someone has quoted something out of the Old Testament. And then someone else will quote something else about the Old Testament, and they're having a fight about, well, if you're going to take this literally, then you have to take this literally, thank God for the good confirmation instruction that I had and that most of you have had. That helps us understand that when you look at that Old Testament law that Paul's referring to, it's not all the same. And that has to be frankly acknowledged. And frankly, theologians have understood that for thousands of years, but none of these people are theologians. And I don't want to say that if you're not a theologian, you shouldn't be commenting on Scripture, but maybe you shouldn't be doing it in public. Well, was it Lincoln who said this, or maybe it's this, better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and leave no doubt?
I think that's in the Old Testament.
It should be. All right. So, but you know what I'm saying? So you've got you've got moral law, which would apply for all people for all time. But it's peppered in there along with ceremonial law, which was, don't eat pork and don't eat shellfish, and you got to dress your priest in a turban and perform these sacrifices. And we understand that ceremonial law went the way of the dinosaurs. It was not something that followed after Christ. And so Paul is kind of referring to that. And then you had civil law, because this was also a nation. This Jewishness thing runs across ethnicity, it ran across politics, it ran across religion. It was this whole thing, it was the theocracy, all of life wrapped up in this. And so while we can maybe take some advice from the civil law in the Old Testament, it does not apply directly. Nobody has ever come to me with their unruly people have come to me with their unruly teenagers. That's happened in my office a lot. Next to marriage counseling, it's the biggest kind of counseling I've had to do. But nobody has ever come to me with their unruly teenager and quoted, I don't know if it's Exodus, Leviticus, or Deuteronomy, and quoted the passage that says, if you've got an unruly teenager, you take him out to the elders of the gate and you stone him to death.
You wish you could, but it's not probably a good sign.
Well, besides the fact that our society frowns on that very big, it's just, yeah, so, and I don't even know how much that ever got applied in the Old Testament. Most parents love their kids and would go to the ends of the earth and would suffer and sacrifice rather than do that. Partly that was God saying to the teenagers, shape up. But it was there in the law. You remember when the woman caught in adultery is taken to Jesus, what do the Jewish leaders want to do? And what is the basis for that?
Without sin, so the first one.
Well, so Jesus, of course, gets them to back off by saying, if you haven't sinned yourself, then you start throwing the stones. But that was Old Testament law. If you were caught in adultery, stoning was the punishment. Now, that being said, we don't know how often they actually applied it that way. This is this is kind of where moral law and civil law begin to cross over a bit. They weren't necessarily obligated to kill all these people, but it was on the books. Just like if you go to a judge today, he's got a range he can use in the sentences, right? And they had some leeway that way too. King David committed adultery.
Yeah, they didn't stone him to death.
The prophet Nathan didn't confront him and then start throwing rocks. Right? He said, the Lord has taken away your sin. And not only that, he allowed him even to remain king. All right, so my point is, if you're going to quote from the Old Testament, you do have to have an idea of which kind of law you're mucking around in. And one of the good ways to understand that is to look at the New Testament, which doesn't have civil law, and which doesn't have ceremonial law, which is purely only moral. It's far safer thing for a Christian maybe who's not sure of, he's not really sure on his feet in the Old Testament to go to the New Testament and quote something from there. The LGBTQ stuff, homosexuality. A lot of Christians will go to Leviticus on that. Well, okay, and that is moral law, and that would be legitimate as such. But you're always going to, if you got people who know they know enough to be dangerous, as we say, they know a little bit about, well, yeah, but what about, eating pork? You can't, well, okay, so let that one go. Go to the New Testament. Romans chapter 1 provides you everything and greater clarity you ever need to know on that particular issue, and then you're standing solid. But otherwise, people are arguing back and forth. But this is kind of the idea that Paul has, because now that he is a New Testament believer, since he understands that Jesus is the Messiah, and that the civil law and the ceremonial law have faded away, he's not under that law anymore. And there's a sense in the gospel in which even in the moral law, we're not under it in this quite the same sense that the Old Testament believer felt himself to be under it, right? But Paul understood that, as a New Testament believer, I'm really completely free from all law. It's not that God lets me do things that are against the law, but I do them not because I'm afraid of him, but because he's changed my heart. Right? The New Testament Christian who is following the law is, in as much as he is a Christian, now recognize we have the old man who still needs to the other side of it, in as much as he's a Christian, he's doing it because he's been restored to be like Adam and Eve, before they fell, and he's just doing what comes naturally. Adam and Eve never thought, should. Adam never said before he fell into sin, should I cheat on my wife?
With who?
No, there's a law against that.
Sorry.
Well, I'm a little bit handicapped here on examples in the freshness of the whole situation, right? It would never have come up if there had been another woman. It wouldn't have come up as an issue. Why? Because it would not have occurred to him. He just lived in it without having it being this external thing bearing down on him. You have some sense of how your sanctification is going when you look at what God asks of you and the degree to which you think, better not do that, God will get you. That's old thinking. Or the degree to which you think, of course this is what I would do. When you're not being compelled against your will, but it has become your will. Right? So in that sense, he's not under the law. But he was willing to, so if he's among Jews, so do you know the story about Timothy? Timothy, who Paul met on his first missionary journey, grew up under a godly Jewish grandmother and mother who shared the faith with him, and then was converted to Christianity when Paul came, had a Gentile father. But because it's a Gentile father, Timothy had never been circumcised. Now, what kind of law is circumcision?
Old Testament.
Old Testament. Still required? It's not moral law, right? There's nothing moral about having a piece of skin cut off your body. It's not a love thing. It's not a matter of serving your neighbor. It has nothing to do with that, right? So, this would be like eating pork, eating shellfish, performing the sacrifices, dressing up the priest a certain way, building the temple according to these dimensions. It's ceremonial law. So what does Paul do with Timothy when he takes him on his second missionary journey with him?
Has him circumcised.
He has him circumcised. Well, why would he do that?
Make him fit in, or the others wouldn't be doubting him.
To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jew. Paul understood that when he did his mission work, where's the first place he went in town?
Synagogue.
The synagogue. And if they find out that Paul is dragging this uncircumcised Gentile into the synagogue, he has no audience, because he's not had a chance to explain about the coming of the Messiah. And so Timothy submitted himself to circumcision, and Paul circumcised him so that he could win people. It became an issue of love, but not because of circumcision per se, right? So sometimes we have these natural affinities with people, and sometimes we can just be interested in people and love them. And that's kind of what Paul is pointing out here. So broaden your horizons. Broaden your horizons. Then the other side of it, to those not having the law, I became like one not having law. So who's he talking about now?
Gentiles.
This is the Gentiles, right? This is the Greeks and Romans. And the residents of Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, that he would have met on his missionary journeys that were Gentile. And understand, it was probably easy for Paul to go back and live like a Jew, because he'd grown up that way. It's harder to try to live like the Gentiles. Now, does that mean that Paul was going to jump into all kinds of immoralities with the Gentiles? No, in fact, if you read his letters, he recognizes that was one of the big challenges with bringing people over from the Gentile world, that they had a lot of stuff that they thought was just natural that they had to let go. Because on certain issues, especially sexuality type issues, their natural understanding had grown dim, as often happens in societies. Not every society, but societies that aren't ruled in some way by Scripture tend to lose sight of those kinds of things to some degree. And that would have been true of the ancient Greco-Roman world. So he wouldn't have gone with those things. In fact, that's the kinds of things he would change. But if he's at the Gentile house and they are serving pork, I'm guessing Paul is getting out his knife and his fork and he's choking it down. And understand that for societies, I don't know, how much you do or don't like pork, and that can just be a matter of personal taste. But in societies where it has been forbidden, it would be maybe a little bit akin to if you go over to Asia today, parts of Asia, parts of China, they may serve you some kinds of meat or food that you would really have, you would really have trouble thinking this is something I want to eat. Ask Margaret, Margaret did Friends of China. English as a second language as a roadmap and an opportunity to get to know people, to be able to share the gospel. She did that in China 2 or 3 years. And, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Ask her about some of the stuff that she got served, or some of the stuff that she just knew better than to ask. Put it in front of you, you just eat it. You talk about people, some parts of Africa where they don't have a lot of opportunity for food that's high in protein, and so certain insects that end up in the diet. But you love these people and you want to win them. And if you think opera's bad, but would you do this to save a person from hell?
Monkey brains.
Yeah, well, all right, yeah.
I'm also sure I'm also actually vegetarian.
I'm sorry that you're going to go to eternal perdition and suffer forever and ever. I can't eat this.
I'm also sure because I'm also living.
So this is what Paul did, right? So back to the main point here. If you've got some natural affinity, some natural common interests and such, it's an easy place to build relationships. We should take advantage of those things. As a Christian, you can do more and better than that, as this passage points out. Mark 3:14. He appointed 12, designating them apostles that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. What key element do you see in Jesus' strategy for making disciples of the 12? How long was Jesus' earthly ministry, do you know?
33.
Approximately 3 years.
Goodness.
Approximately 3 years, his earthly ministry. He lived here 30 years or so, but approximately 3 years.
Well, they had the opportunity to stay with him, to be with him throughout. I mean, they didn't have like jobs where I got to go back home and go to work.
So before he is going to send them out, they're going to have some time with him. And it's 3 years. And it's not like they just went to class and then went home. They ate with him. They traveled with him. They slept in the same places he slept. They lived with him. I don't know if it's based on this or just the way it's worked out. Most seminary programs are 3 years. But I went to school in the morning, and I was, school day started at 7, ended at noon. It was a class every hour during that time. It was a pretty heavy class load, but I was done at noon. And I went home, or went back to the dormitories the first year, or went to my job. It wasn't living with the professors on a full-time basis. So it was a very intensive time. But so what do you learn? It says here, why do you suppose he did this? What was this important, or is this important? Well, and then they really got the answer there. It takes time. So for Jesus to get these guys to be ready to go, it took time. And if you are trying to disciple people, understand it takes time. Sometimes even pastors chafe a little bit at the fact that to become a full member of our church, we expect probably between 12 and 20 classes, depending on how long you're meeting, how long the classes themselves are. And sometimes 12 classes if you're meeting once a week, that's 3 months. 20 is going to be approaching half a year. Can't we just sign up? In many evangelical churches, if you attend, you come 2 Sundays, and on the 3rd Sunday you go up and you shake hands in front of the congregation, and that's it. But it takes time. And Jesus wanted the disciples to be well instructed and ready. And he was building the relationship as well as filling their heads with information. And when we go about trying to win disciples, it's going to take time. And we want to fill their heads with good information about God and His Word, but we also want to build a relationship.
And it was important for them to be with him because when you're learning something, it's easier to, for children, living with the parents, they start to mimic the parents' manners and things like that, so.
Yeah, what's a child's job? What's a child's job?
To learn.
Like even before they go to school. Play. Play.
Yeah.
What do they play? Back to why do my granddaughters play with the Barbies or with the little baby dolls? They are pretending to do what grown-ups do, right? And they've got the little plastic kitchen center thing. They pretend to cook, and they'll bring me, plastic cake or a plastic pork chop or plastic French fries, and you pretend like you're eating with them, and then they get to pretend to cook. And little boys have their trucks, and they're on the sandbox, and they're pretending to do construction work. And I mean, little girls might be out in the sandbox with the toy. When I had a huge collection of Tonka toys when I was a kid. I had bulldozers, I had backhoes, I had dump trucks. My dad kept a scrap pile in his workshop, little ends and sometimes he would use things out of the scrap pile, but I had permission to do that. And then I've known a few other people who've done this. I was the oldest in the family, so I had 3 siblings younger, and of course they ate baby food, and Gerber's used to come in glass jars, and he would have his shelves lined with glass jars, and in those glass jars, this is his way of organizing his nuts and his bolts and his nails, and nothing went to waste. So if he pulled a nail out of a piece of wood, if it was capable of being straightened, it got straightened. And there were certain of these jars and the old used nails and such that I also had permission to use. There were certain tools I was not permitted to use. Sometimes I tried to use them, that didn't usually end well either. He had a chisel set. Once used one of his wood chisels to try to pry a nail out of a board. That doesn't work. Anyway, point is, it's learning by doing, right? It's learning by doing. It's their job. It's their We talk about vocation, your calling. Your calling when you're a little kid is this imitation of adulthood that they call play. You had the little grandparents give their grandkids these little plastic push mowers that make all kinds of noise in the house that you wouldn't want in your own house, but it's okay if your children have to deal with that.
Yes.
So that they pretend that they're mowing the lawn. That play is their job, but they're learning. And so when the disciples were with Jesus, they weren't playing at outreach, but they were watching it done. They were participating a little bit. He would train them up a while, and it was 2 different times when he sent the disciples out for experimental journey, see how it goes, go to the villages, go 2 by 2. He gave them instructions on what to do while they were gone. They were getting their training that way. And then the rest of the time they listened to him teach, and they watched how he loved people. All of that they were taking in. A reminder to us also that as Christians, it's not just about the things we preach and teach. It is also about the way we live. That's instructional, and that's a part of this process of winning people also. Letter C. It may not be easy to like some unchurched people we know initially, because we normally like people for what they are like. I think I made a point of this last week also. Every soul is a soul. And just because you find them irritating, obnoxious, or otherwise unappealing, doesn't mean that Jesus feels that way about them. And he would like to have them as his disciples too. So if you think it's hard to, eat certain foods or take in certain entertainments, you got to get past their personality deficiencies that make you bothered by them. Just because you don't like them doesn't mean you are excused from trying to save their soul. Right? That's hard. That you're going to take this person that you would prefer not to spend any time with at all and try to make them a part of your church, where you are now guaranteed you're going to see them on a regular basis and maybe have to work with them on committees and such and love them as your family. But if you think that's hard, what do you suppose it was like for Jesus to come to a world of rebels and embrace them all? Let's not kid ourselves about how appealing we were. We weren't. When we were still enemies, Paul writes, when we were still God's enemies, Christ died for us. And so if Jesus could get over that enough to come to our world and sacrifice himself for us, maybe we can see souls a little differently than just, I don't find this person very appealing. And there are non-Christian character traits that are not likable. Remember, God didn't so like the world that he gave his one and only Son. He loved us. Love is based not on what the other person is like, but on what we are like. We're reading Mere Christianity for our book club, which we may be extending in another month, because it was just Diane and I having a conversation yesterday. But Lewis writes about that too, with people having this idea that your marriage is based on falling in love. But falling in love has almost nothing to do with your marriage. It's maybe what gets you together in the first place. And if you think that romantic love is, in its initial form, is going to be sustaining for 30, 40, 50 years, or that if that romantic love in its initial form, if it goes away, that somehow is an excuse to escape the marriage, you have no idea what marriage is for or what the whole institution is about. I'm not against romantic love. It's a great thing. And God uses it to get people together initially. But it has to transform into something deeper and less selfish and all about commitment that embraces its purpose and that is more akin to Christian sacrificial love, if it's going to be anything that will last. God has enabled us to love. We need not condone ungodly traits and habits by befriending an unchurched acquaintance any more than God condones sin by loving sinners. A common misperception is that Jesus didn't care about people's sins. That when he hung out with the sinners, he was telling them that their sin was okay. When he said to the woman caught in adultery that first of all, he gets her out of being stoned to death, then neither do I condemn you, that somehow he was condoning it. No, he says, now go leave your life of sin. So he was not afraid to spend time with these people, to befriend these people, to try to win these people, but he at no point in time ever approved or wanted to solidify them. It just came up again, I don't remember where I read it, someone talking about, doesn't God say don't judge? Okay. Talk about the most misused concept or passage in all of Scripture. Nobody outside the secular world, and probably the majority of Christians, really understand the biblical concept there behind the word judge. You should not treat others as though you are better than they are. That doesn't mean you should stop identifying bad behavior for what it is. And you should not conflate those ideas. They are two different things. And when Jesus says don't judge, he's saying don't be a Pharisee who thinks you're the great grand example and everybody should be more like you and that they are less than you. He's not saying take the person who's caught in some perversion, or caught in some substance abuse, or caught in some inability to control their violent outputs, and say, well, who am I to judge? That's just the way you are. Go live a happy life, right? Those are completely different things, and Christianity is not about, what would someone say? Jesus loves you just the way you are, but because he loves you, he's not going to leave you just the way you are. Right? He is entirely intent on changing those things. And that's going to be long, hard work, but he's not going to leave you there. You can love the people in where they are now. Jesus did. But you also need to be working at leading them along the path, recognizing that you too are walking that same path and have not reached the destination, not nearly. As we love people, we can learn also to like them genuinely. So eventually you can come to have an affection for these people also. And the regenerating power of God can change the unlikable aspects of sinful human nature in others as in us. All right, we're not going to do the activity here, and we're about at the end of time. It says, you can do this for yourself at home. Make a list of activities to share with a person you hope to reach with the gospel, activities that will build a relationship and provide opportunities for witness. So just it's something to keep in mind. As you think about, I would like to reach out to this person. So, Pastor Quant, Mark's previous pastor. I was a little bit floored. We started mission churches at the same time. The same time he started in St. George, Utah, I was starting here at Grace. And I was a little bit floored that he was actually submitting to the mission board restaurant receipts when he was taking people out to eat. But then I thought about, so the government will let you write that off as a business expense, won't they?
Yes.
And so he was simply applying that to church life. In the business of church, it was a business expense to try to take this person out and win them. I like to eat. And you don't have to go to the most expensive place in town. But there is something also about eating food with people. And most people I know like to eat. And so maybe it's a kind of activity you could do with someone that you maybe don't share much else with them, but they probably like to do it. I'm probably happy to just eat the expense because I like to go out to eat. But I've done that with some people. When I was first trying to reach out to Josh Dial, Jackie Long, you guys remember them? I arranged to take them each out to eat. Someone else recently. I don't know where things stand currently. Nick Thompson, I took him out to eat. There was a lady who had her kid in our vacation Bible school, and wouldn't be just me, that would maybe be a little odd or awkward, bring my wife along, but it was a lady in our soccer Bible camp last summer that I had kind of initially scheduled, and then that fell through. But as a way of trying to do something that wasn't just this intense, all right, here I am the minister, I'm going to shove a bunch of theology down your throat, but a more casual atmosphere where you're doing something you like to do both, and you can use it as a get to know you. Right? So you can think that's just one idea, other things. But some people I don't know, maybe Lila's in the sewing club and maybe she can help some people over there. Diane, you were telling me about some other, it was scrapbooking, right? And so the head of that thing, it sounds like, has kind of got the corner on the market in terms of trying to win those people. But okay, she's found people who have a common interest, and she is using that towards gospel witness. And on it goes. So you can take that as a home assignment to think about. And we'll pick it up there at point 4 next time.